Hello. Order. Order. No? Uh,
Editorial board member of Panamanian newspapers as La Estrella and El Siglo, director of the Panamanian Association of Business Executives, vice minister of Education, director of the Panamanian Association of Maritime Law. However, this background doesn't fully reflect the personalities and struggles of Fulo as fighting the enemies of freedom. His main concern today is interference of the states in our natural rights as it is life, liberty, and property, from which this privacy derives from. This state's interferences is reflected in a fiscal persecution to citizens and companies who just want to protect their heritage. The Panama Papers was a tipping point for Panamanian sovereignty, for which Fulo is one of the most active members into fighting international organizations whose mission has been to impose unified models to countries that have their own successful models, as it is in the case of Panama. Fulo is a hardcore libertarian. He pleads to respect the personal decisions of peoples in terms of drugs, sex, and money, as long as others are respected. He has also been asked to be political president of Panama, but for now he has been rejected this idea. But I think with his characteristic red beard and personality, he will be a really good model for Panama culture. So now I leave to Adolfo to present.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My dear friend Florencia, which I have to thank her because I am here because of her. She's also from Panama, and she's the one who contacted me. So if either you like my speech or you don't, you have to talk to her later on. Big lies by Big Brother. Is it transparency, spying, or the road to a totalitarian state? Whoops. Okay. How the war, what I like to talk or try to explain is how the war on drugs, the financing of weapons of mass destruction, the war on terrorism, and now tax evasion are being used by the G20 countries to weaken the fundamental civil rights of millions of innocent people, and at the same time, under the pretext of world security and peace, are violating other countries' sovereignty by imposing upon them de facto international standards, eliminating basic fundamental rights like personal and financial privacy, banking confidentiality, due process, and presumption of innocence. I would like to refer the war on drugs as the big lie of the 21st century. Of the 20th century. Like alcohol prohibition in the 1920s, drug prohibition has failed. The failures are more than obvious. Millions of wasted money, millions of wasted life, millions of wasted opportunities. And all of it has been a lie. And now that the war on drugs looks to come to an end due to the marijuana revolution, now Big Brother needs a new war. And that answer is tax evasion. After Second World War, the first war was war on communism. Then became the war on drugs. Then war on money laundering. Then war on terrorism. And now because of the marijuana veil is coming down, they need something else. Now they have invented a new war, a new eternal war, tax evasion. But let's listen how this lie begins. Marijuana, opium, and coca have been used for thousands of years for both medical and spiritual purposes. What makes a drug illegal, it has nothing to do with any scientific assessment of the relative risks of this drug, but it has everything to do with who is associated with these drugs. The first anti-opium laws in the 1870s were directed at Chinese immigrants to the US. The first anti-cocaine laws in the early 1900s were directed at black men in the South, And the first anti-marijuana laws in the Midwest and the Southwest in the 1910s and 20s were targeted at Mexican immigrants and Mexican Americans. So why marijuana is illegal in the first place? And that is an excellent question. Now that many politicians and the public are taking a more objective look at marijuana, many are asking about the legal history of marijuana and how it ended up in the category of drugs deemed most dangerous by the federal government, classified as a Schedule I drug. Marijuana is classified as a Schedule I drug in the United States, which means that the drug has a high potential for abuse, that the drug has no currently accepted medical treatment used in the U.S., and that it has a lack of accepted safety for use under medical supervision. Another examples of, like marijuana, of Schedule I drugs are heroin, ecstasy, LSD, methamphetamine, crystal meth, Quaalude. Examples of Schedule II drugs, which means, according to the law in the United States, which are less dangerous than marijuana, are Schedule II, which is methadone, morphine, opium, Percocet, Oxycontin, and cocaine. But how did the marijuana end up here? We need to go back to the early 1900s, just after the American Revolution. A large immigration of Mexicans fled into the U.S. who brought with them their native language, culture, and custom, and one of them was the use of cannabis as medicine and a relaxant. They call it marijuana. For the white Americans, however, who were familiar with the term cannabis as the plant that was used in almost all tinctures and medicines available at the time, for the mass majority of Americans, the word marijuana was a foreign term. So when the media, this is extract of a movie called Reefer Madness from 1937. So when the media began to play on the fears that the public had about these new citizens by falsely spreading claims about the disrupted Mexicans with their dangerous native behavior, including marijuana use, the rest of the nation was unaware that this evil plant called marijuana was the same plant they have already been using for many years as medicine, clothes, food, etc. The demonization of the cannabis plant was an extension of the demonization of the Mexican immigrants. The idea was to have an excuse to search, detain, deport Mexican immigrants. That excuse became marijuana. During the hearings on marijuana law in the 1930s, claims were made about marijuana's ability to cause men of color to become violent and solicit sex from white women. This image became the backdrop for the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, which effectively banned its use and sales. While the act was ruled unconstitutional years later, it was replaced with the Controlled Substance Act in 1970. 10,000 years of known use of cannabis throughout history. Cannabis has been one of the first crops cultivated by men who discovered many applications over 10,000 years ago as a source of textile, fiber, food, medicine, as well as recreational and spiritual drugs. There is archaeological evidence on the use of cannabis in ancient China since 10,000 BC to make garments, robes, paper, oils, and food. The first record of the medicinal use of cannabis dates back to the Chinese Emperor Zheng Nun. From China, cannabis passed to Korea in 2000 BC, from where it arrived in India around 1000 BC. Then it spread through the Middle East in the year 1400 BC, reaching southern Russia and Ukraine, from where it spread to most European countries, and due to the influence of the Middle East, the cultivation of cannabis began to appear next in Africa. In 1525, the Spanish brought the cannabis plant to the New World, to America, thank God. The English introduced it to Jamestown in 1611, where it became an important commercial crop along with cotton and tobacco. From at least the 5th century before Christ until the end of the 19th century, 90% of all the gear on all ships worldwide were manufactured with cannabis. Even the sailors' clothes, including canvas shoes, rope soles, were made of cannabis fiber. In the 16th century, 17th, 18th, and 19th century, a standard cargo ship or whaling ship or any kind of ship for the transportation of goods and people carry an average of 50 to 100 tons of gear made of cannabis fiber. The paintings of Da Vinci, Van Gogh, and Rembrandt were painted on canvas, which derived from the word cannabis, which is the name of the fabric made with the fiber of the cannabis stock. The sails of the ship of Columbus, Cristobal Columbus, the tents of the cars of the frontiersmen that crossed America to California, that traveled to the west, and the clothes, including the famous Levi jeans, sold to the miners in California during the gold rush, all were made with the resistant fiber of cannabis. Until the early 20th century, 80% of the textiles worldwide were made mainly of cannabis fibers, which is softer, warmer, more absorbent to water, and has 3 times the strength of cotton, which makes it more lasting. Before 1937, 70 to 90% of all ropes and cords were made of cannabis fiber. After the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 was passed in the United States, nylon instead of cannabis, nylon, which is an artificial textile made of oil, became the new synthetic fiber, whose patents were owned by the DuPont company, which also obviously replaced natural fibers from cannabis, whose production cost became very expensive at that time. Until 1883, between 75 to 90% of all paper in the world was made of cannabis, not from trees. So it's more environmental than paper from trees. The first draft of the U.S. Declaration of Independence was written on cannabis paper. The Gutenberg Bible in the 15th century. The King James Bible in the 17th century. The works of Fitz, Hughes, and Ludlow, Mark Twain, Victor Hugo, Alexandre Dumas, and Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll in the 19th century, they all were printed in cannabis paper. Benjamin Franklin created the first cannabis fiber paper factory in the United States of America, which allowed the American colony to have a free press. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were also large cannabis growers, and they smoked it too. Until about 1800, cannabis oil was the most consumed lighting oil in the world, second only to the whale oil. In the 1960s, the government halted scientific research to evaluate their medical safety and efficacy as drugs became a symbol of youthful rebellion, social upheaval, and political dissent. By June 1979, President Nixon has declared a war on drugs. That was the first time the term war on drugs was used, by dramatically increasing the size and presence of the Federal Drug Control Agency, creating the DEA, and pushed through measures such as mandatory sentencing and knockout warrant. A top Nixon aide, John Ehrlichman, the guy smiling to the right, at that time, White House Domestic Affairs. What this was really all about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had 2 real enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or blacks. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and cocaine, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. The close quotes. In 1972, the Schaefer Commission appointed President Nixon. In 1972, the Schaefer Commission, appointed by President Nixon to study whether drugs were dangerous or not, unanimously recommended decriminalizing the possession and distribution of marijuana for personal use. Nixon ignored it, ignored the answer of the conclusion of his own commission, and kept the criminalization process. Between 1973 and 1977, however, 11 states decriminalized marijuana possession. In January 1977, President Jimmy Carter was inaugurated on a campaign platform that included marijuana decriminalization. In October 1977, the Senate Judiciary Committee voted to decriminalize possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana for personal use. Within just a few years, though, the tide had shifted. Proposals to decriminalize marijuana were abandoned as parents became increasingly concerned about high rates of teen marijuana use. Marijuana was ultimately caught up into a broader cultural backlash against the perceived permissiveness of the 1970s. Then came Ronald Reagan, which him began a long period of skyrocketing rates of incarceration due to his unprecedented expansion of the drug war. I don't know, the number of people behind bars for nonviolent drug law offenses increased from 50,000 in 1980 to all of this criminal policy. Public concerns about illicit drug use built throughout the 1980s, largely due to media portrayals of people addicted to crack. As First Lady Nancy Reagan began a highly publicized anti-drug campaign with the slogan, "Just say no," very famous, at least when I was smaller and wiser. By 1985, 4% of the American population viewed drug abuse as the nation's #1 problem. By September 1989, it has reached a remarkable 64%, one of the most intense fixations by the American public on any issue in polling history. However, it came from 4 to 64% in 4 years. But within less than a year, however, the figure plummeted again to less than 10% as the media lost interest and the propaganda vanished. The draconian policies enacted during that hysteria remain, however, and continue to result in escalating levels of arrest and incarceration. Although Bill Clinton advocated for treatment instead of incarceration during his 1992 presidential campaign after his first few months in the White House, he reverted to the drug war strategy of his Republican predecessor by continuing to escalate the drug war. Notoriously, Bill Clinton rejected a U.S. Sentencing Commission recommending to eliminate the disparity between crack and powder cocaine sentences because both products come from coca leaf. However, crack users are mostly black, and usually crack offenders, they get a higher offense, higher penalties, whereas powder cocaine is mostly used by whites. The drug war was running out of steam when George Bush arrived in the White House, yet he allocated more funds to the war. By the end of his term, there were about 40,000 paramilitary-style SWAT raids on American families every year, mostly from nonviolent drug law offenses like smoking in their house. President Obama, despite supporting several successful policy changes, did not shift the majority of drug policy funding to a health-based approach instead of the failed military approach. Now, the new administration is threatening to take these things backwards towards a 1980s-style drug war. President Trump's Attorney General Jeff Sessions has made it very clear that he does not support the sovereignty of states to legalize marijuana and believe good people don't smoke marijuana. That's a very strong assertion. Bad policies, horrendous consequences. Mass incarceration and criminalization, and I'm going to only refer to the United States, but probably it happens most in all Latin America where the drug war is being fought. The drug war is not being fought in Europe nor in the US, it's being fought in our backyard, in Latin America. We are putting the deaths. The United States is home to less than 5% of the world's population, but nearly 25% of its prisoners. Over 1.6 million people are arrested, prosecuted, incarcerated, placed under criminal justice supervision, or deported each year on a drug law violation. These punitive approaches far exceed what is necessary to maintain public safety and primarily target poor people and minorities. Accidental drug overdose is currently the leading cause of death in the United States for those under 50, and overdosing by both legal and illegal drugs combined. It's overdoses. Drug overdose deaths now exceed those attributable to firearms, car accidents, homicides, and HIV altogether. More people died from a drug overdose in 2016 alone than died in the entire Vietnam War. Most of these deaths are preventable, but the tough-on-crime rhetoric of the decades-long war and the stigma associated with the drug has blocked the widespread adoption of life-saving overdose prevention and treatments. Nearly 72,000 people died of a drug overdose in 2017. 66% by prescription opioids. Not marijuana, not cocaine, not illegal drugs. 66% has died or overdosed for prescription opioids. That's more people killed by guns, car crashes, or HIV ever killed in a single year in the United States, and higher crashes than all U.S. military casualties in the Vietnam War and Iraq wars combined. Some statistic, number of people killed by drug overdose, 72,000, 62 of them are from legal drugs, opioids, whereas you have number of people killed by tobacco, almost 500,000. That doesn't include car crashes because of drunk driving. Diabetes, 90,000. Obesity, that's 2016 statistic. Diabetes, 90,000. Aspirin, 3,000. Alcohol, 80,000. Marijuana, 0. There's no record. There's no registration of anybody dying of marijuana use in over 10,000 years. Don't believe me. Just try to find one. If there be one, it will be all over the news. There's another drug enforcement official often cited drug violence as a reason that drugs must be eliminated from our society, but it is actually the system of drug provision that causes. There are more statistics. Cost of the war on drugs by U.S. taxpayer, over $50 billion. Amount spent since 2002 by USA in the drug of war, $1 trillion. Percentage that goes to enforce body. Who benefits from the war on drugs? There are 766 reasons not to end the drug of war, the war on drugs. The oil and gas industry, it's worth 135 billion. Big pharma, 446 billion. 45% of which represents the U.S. market represents 46% of that. The war on terrorism. Why there is terrorism? The terrorism doesn't exist because of the fight against Jews and Arabs. Those people have lived together for over 2,000 years. They just became angry when the British and the French, when they dissected the Ottoman Empire of having banks and offshore companies, and they say that we are promoting the financing of weapons of mass destruction. And in my ignorance, I started looking, what are weapons of mass destruction? And the definition is the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction is the transfer and export of nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons, their means of delivery, and related materials. And I say, okay, I'm going to look to see who are the countries who produce most of the arms, and who are the ones who buy it. And when I see them, the list, my left is the countries that most sells arms. United States, Russia, China, France, Germany, United Kingdom, Spain, Italy, Ukraine, especially the OECD countries from Central Europe are the ones who blame Panama because of our offshore companies. And then who are they selling the arms to? India, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, China, Turkey, Algeria, Iraq, Pakistan. So if there is a problem with the financial of weapons of mass destruction, it's not because of the Panamanian banks or the Panamanian offshore company. It's because of the countries who are producing and selling those arms. If you want to regulate or stop that business or destroy it, don't attack Panamanian banks. Go to the source and tell those countries, stop producing those weapons. That's another farce, at least in my point of view, as a way I see it. But all this money laundering war, the marijuana represents 80% of all the fight. And because if you exclude the marijuana war, then the amount of that got left after for the rest is very minimal. So now, because they are facing with the realization that marijuana, the results of its benefits are going out, now they are invented a new war, tax evasion. No? And tax evasion, the war on tax evasion is, for me, in my case, the big lie of the 21st century. The OECD, the IMF, and the Financial Action Task Force, all of them mere marionettes of the G20, have imposed transparency and accountability as the new international standard in order to fight tax evasion and money laundering. Especially, and they are trying to impose, especially in small developing countries like Panama, in violation of their sovereign rights, their standards. Thanks to citizens like Julian Assange, however, have experienced a surprise burst of transparency. It is indeed a cause of some satisfaction that some governments are finally being taught a lesson in real accountability, a dose of their own medicine, to put it mildly. We welcome the loud public backlash against state power as citizens around the world supported Mr. Assange as an expression of rejection of the intrusiveness, bureaucratic states which have been erected in Western societies after 9/11. Some of us, especially as Panamanian citizens, are reflecting and enjoying that if Western countries, especially G20s, spy on private emails through mass electronic surveillance, automatic exchange of financial information, and receive stolen information from banks, trust companies, law and accounting firms, then they should expect to be paid back in their own currency. But let's ask one question ourselves. Is transparency good or evil? Do citizens and/or governments have transparency and accountability are only appropriate where a servant answers to his master? This is a great phrase that I heard Terry Dwyer said, which is a lecturer from Australia. After all, in a democracy, in any democracy and society where freedom and civil rights are protected, if there is a master-servant relationship, then it is the people represented individually by each citizen who represents the master, and the government represents the servants, especially those unelected bureaucrats from the OECD, IMF, and the UN. There is no reason why my affairs should be transparent to you or to anyone's, or for me to be accountable to you or to anyone, if there is no relationship between us and vice versa. If, on the other hand, I have been entrusted with your asset, then obviously what is done with it should be transparent to you, and I should be accountable to you and no one else. Then again, we must remember, as the servants in this equation, the funds collected by taxes by governments do not belong to the state, nor the governments, even less to the bureaucrats. Transparency and accountability only make sense in the context of one person acting as other person's agents or on his behalf, or as its servants. Transparency applies to government because they are funded by taxes, which are paid by the taxpayers. On the contrary, people's private affairs are no one else's business, not even the government's. They should remain as private as the individual concerned chooses. Therefore, public policy should always protect the right of privacy. The WikiLeaks saga, along with others like Panama Papers, LukeLeaks, WikiLeaks, and Paradise Papers, should provoke some serious rethinking about the nature, rights, duties, and limits of government in a free society, and the internal contradiction of so-called liberal democratic Western societies becoming actually global surveillance states. Privacy is both a human right and a property right, and a fundamental and very fundamental piece of personal freedom. Hernando de Soto, the great Peruvian writer, which is in his book, The Mystery of Capital, says, why capitalism triumphs in the West and fails everywhere else? Well, it is because a country can only develop and attract capital investment if it can offer secure property rights, and you cannot secure it without privacy. And I want to clarify, privacy doesn't mean secrets, nor opaque, nor obscure, nor evil. Therefore, private property is private, not transparent. It is private. You cannot have privacy. You cannot have private property without privacy. Therefore, private investment cannot be attracted if details are to be made public to every inquisitive foreign bureaucrat and even worse to the public for personal security reasons, especially in Latin America. Privacy is very well protected, not only by the Constitution of the United States, but also by the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Fourth Amendment of the US Constitution, which was enacted in 1776. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searchers and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, particularly describing the place of his search and the presentation, blah, blah, blah. And the Article 17 almost says the same thing. So what happened with automatic exchange of information and the elimination of banking secrecy? Automatic exchange of information means that you have to be open just because, and this violates completely. This is the new law of the United Nations in my case. The United Nations should protect private human rights, and now has becoming he's promoting, in my opinion, collectivism, socialism, and other failed political theories. Because of the problem in the financial crisis of 2008 was not the consequence of tax havens, like Mr. Sarkozy and Mr. Osborne once said. What happened in Europe right now, the economical problem in Europe now, is because the welfare state that most of the countries here are following is a sham. It's a fraud. Your social system is almost broken. And the weight of the government is too heavy, and that's why you're having problems. And the consequence is not, the guilty part is not Panama nor the financial havens. There are some of court decisions that have said, confirmed the right of the people to actually diminish his taxes as long as he can. I'm going to just read one. No man in the country is under the smallest obligation, moral or other, so to arrange his legal relations to his business or property as to enable the inland revenue to put the largest shovel in his stores. The inland revenue is not so low, and quite rightly to take every advantage which is open to it under the taxing statutes for the purpose of depleting the taxpayer pocket. And the taxpayer is in like manner entitled to be as astute to prevent, so far as he honestly can, the depletion of his means by the inland revenue. Because at the end, taxes are legal matters, not moral matters. I'm going to pass through very quickly. This is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I already read. You know, everybody has the right to freedom of movement, resident within the borders of each state. Everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to his country. So countries should not overtax people for living. Inheritance tax, tax on capital, and overtaxation is an impediment of the right of people to move his country. Well, globalization is not globalism. Globalization means to compete person. I'm going to finish that Panama has always been a hub transit place. When the Spaniards came to America, they established 3 cities in the continent: Mexico and Peru, which were where they took all the gold and fruits and silver, and Panama, which, if you can see, it's in the middle. It was all the Spaniards took all the goods to Panama, to Portobello, and then shipped it to Europe. And that's what, and they used a mule road by stone called the Camino de Cruces, and the 12 crosses, and the Royal Camino, and which was the predecessor of the. I'm going to finish in a few minutes. The Panama Canal, and this is Panama. No? Why we have the largest airport in Latin America, in Central America? Why we have a Colón free zone? Why we have a banking center, and why we have the Panama Canal and the ports? Not because of money laundering, because we are a cross path of many people and many nations. And we have our industry has been developed to exploit or geographical position. We don't have big lands to cultivate. We don't have industries, large industries. We have been, or DNA has been crafted by services because through history, that has been our task. And because of the lie of drugs, and now the new lie of tax evasion, countries like Panama are being they are being taken away their sovereignty and their right to self-government. That's it. She's going to kill me.
Thank you.
I hope you understand my English. Sorry, I speak English as a second language. And Panama, it is heavenly. We are a tax heaven, and we are a beach heaven, and we are a city heaven, because at the end, wherever you want to go to a heaven, not you want to go to a tax hell. So you don't want to go to a country that is a tax anything. So we are a heavenly country, so you are welcome to come anywhere, anytime. Thank you very much.
Okay. We have 10 minutes for questions. Does anybody has a question? Okay.
Hi there. Can I ask you, like, how do you feel about not having your own currency, like in Panama? And also, like, another part of the question is, how much more time do you think it would take Panama to get over the crisis?
The crisis?
The housing crisis.
Like
not crisis, like to get back on the track of the prosperity.
Okay. If I understand, your first question was, sorry, your first question?
How do you feel like about using US dollars as a mean of payment?
Yeah. We don't, just clarify one moment. Our constitution, we don't use the dollar as a, what our constitution says is that the government is prohibited from printing money, paper money. We do have currencies which are fraction, like coins, and our currency, which is the Balboa, has the same value, par with the dollar. So when you are in Panama, you receive paper money in dollars, and when you change, you give the change in coins, you will receive Panamanian coins and American coins in the same. But to answer your question, what our constitution says is that there's no legal tender in Panama, which means that we can use the euro if you want, and I can use the Iceland currency if I want, if I found somebody who will accept it and a bank who will take that money. Why we use the dollar? Because of the big influence of the United States that we have through history. Beginning in the 1850s, when the United States built the first transisthmian train in Panama, from the Caribbean to the Pacific, in order to take all the workers that were arriving in New York to go to the United States, and they wanted to go to California for the gold rush. And there were two ways to go to California: to either cross the continent in 6 months and fight the Indians, or in 3 weeks, go to a boat, go to Panama, cross the country, and Panama became, places, people crossing, the Americans constructing the railroad, and the same happened when the Panama Canal construction was started. We have a lot of American troops, and that was the money. And Colombia, which we were part of Colombia, we actually saw us like something, that, it's over there, but it's nothing. So actually we don't even have we don't even have the currency of our country, of Colombia. So actually we were used to deal and trade in American dollars. But it's not that our currency is the dollar, but you can still use, we have a freedom of movement. There's a freedom of capital movement in Panama since 2005. Why? Because we are a country of merchants.
Okay.
Wherever you have people crossing by a place, business and commerce and trade develops, and trade, commerce, and business needs freedom, you know? And the second question was, the housing problem. Well, if I understood your question, in Panama, we actually don't have a housing problem. What we have is, there right now, after many years of over-constructions, after many years of a lot of construction, the market has slowed down a lot. So it's a good time to go to Panama and buy apartments. But it has slowed down the real market industry. But there's not like in Miami that you have a housing crash or nothing like that. But yes, it has slowed down a lot because there's an offer of products, and the demand is not enough.
Okay, we have time for one little question. Short answer, Fulo.
Shala vida, loco.
Well, I'm going to make it more complicated because I've got two. I'll slip them in. First one, quickly, you said there's no legal tender. Is there a strong Bitcoin movement in Panama? Is that a possibility? And the second question...
Well, I don't know if it's strong, but definitely there are people who are trying to write about it in the newspapers and in some magazines. There have been some... also some people that are trying to promote that. Myself, I have spoken with some banks about it, not as a banker, but actually because I see blockchain, not Bitcoin, but I see blockchain as a way to get rid of the harassment of the corresponding American banks with the Panamanian banks, you know, because with blockchain I don't need them to do it. As long as, I'm not an expert on blockchain, but as long as the thing that I understand it will work for what I want is to eliminate the corresponding the corresponding American banks. But there are a few ATM, Bitcoin ATM, but you can exchange actually, not many, but so yeah, I mean, we are in a very early stage, but it's beginning to enter.
Could be the future. And quickly, last question. What are you able to do to resist the pressure from the states and developed countries to fall in line? Because at the moment you are one of a few places that are resisting some of the pressures regarding tax evasion and other things. Are you going to be able to maintain that resistance, or are you going to fall in line eventually?
The president of Panama just gave up. I won't, but he gave in, so, well, let's see what happens. But at the end, the fight for freedom is endless. You can obtain, once you obtain freedom, it's not the end of the road. It's the beginning of the road. The difficulty is not getting freedom. The difficulty is to keep it. And that's what I think we need to understand. And I think, and I try to speak to my children. I have a 21-year-old daughter, an 18-year-old daughter, and a 14-year-old son, and French, but English. That's another thing. But that you have to, in an age of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat, it's very difficult to talk about privacy. You know, and sometimes I think the generation of my kids, I'm really worried to them because they don't, sometimes when I start talking about this, they think I'm kind of crazy, you know? But I don't know.
Okay, so
Flor is going to kill me. Yeah, I'm practicing my English, man. Come on.
I'm sorry, but we don't have more time for questions, so thank you for
Damn, you are a strict woman.
I'm sorry. Not sorry.
Gracias.